She slept with the Alpha King, then ran. Now he's tracking her scent across the entire kingdom. Prologue. They say when the moon shifts someone's fate, the body feels it before the mind does. Ayla didn't feel anything when she woke up that morning, just the bitter taste of too little sleep, and the crushing certainty that before the day was over, she'd be pushed into another false choice. In Grey Vale, females don't decide, they get decided. And the bonding ceremony waiting for her in the hall was just a prettier word for the same thing it always was. Ownership. 2 doors, both leading to the same place. The slow erasing of who she could have been. Except there was one detail no one in Grey Vale knew, or pretended not to know. The night before, Ayla had committed a sin that wasn't written into any law, but every wolf would smell the moment she stepped into that hall. She'd slept with a stranger. A man who smelled like snow, iron, and controlled power. And by morning, he was no longer just a stranger. He was Alpha King Kale. Ayla hadn't planned it. She hadn't been chasing love. She hadn't been chasing rescue. She only wanted, for one night, to be touched without being bought. And when she slipped away before sunrise, she believed the secret would die with the dark. But secrets don't survive in a pack. And the worst part wasn't the judgment. The worst part was what woke up with that touch. An ancient law, the law of the scent trail, that doesn't care about shame, tradition, or borders. A law that turns one night into a mark, one encounter into a signal, one invisible female into a target. And suddenly the title of this story wasn't just a dramatic line. Ayla didn't realize it then, but that moment carved her sentence into the world. She slept with the Alpha King and ran. And the Alpha King started hunting her not out of pride. He hunts because the law woke up, and because, for the first time, Ayla might be the key to something that was supposed to stay locked away. If you're into intense wolf stories with fate and brutal twists, subscribe to the channel right now. We post new videos every single day, so hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a chapter. And let's get to know each other. My name is Maggie Reed. I'm the author of these stories. And you? Drop your name in the comments and tell me what city you're watching from. Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Shame has a sound. It's the sound of low laughter, half-swallowed whispers, and more than anything, the sound of Ayla's own heartbeat pounding so loudly, it felt like it was giving her away with every step. She stopped in the doorway for 1 second, just one, because everything inside that room felt designed to crush her. The great hall of the Grey Vale Pack smelled like cheap incense and old wood, and the torchlight on the walls cast a yellow glow that didn't flatter anyone. It did the opposite. It made faces harder, sharper, more judgmental, like masks. And then, like the pack had rehearsed it, the chatter died. Ayla felt the silence hit her skin. She felt the collective stare settle on her like something physical, like invisible hands pressing her shoulders down. The plain dress they'd given her, so she wouldn't disgrace the ritual, they'd said, scraped at her collarbone. Her shoes pinched, and the scent on her, no matter how hard she'd scrubbed with ash soap, still carried the memory of last night. A memory she'd been trying to kill since dawn. Don't think about it. Not now. But the body isn't polite enough to obey. When she started down the center aisle, her legs felt weak. And it wasn't just fear. It was exhaustion, humiliation, and that other thing. The memory of heat that shouldn't have happened. The memory of a low, rough voice saying her name like it mattered. Ayla tightened her fingers around the small bag she carried. It was everything she owned. 2 changes of clothes, an old comb, and a nearly empty jar of salve for bruises. Not enough for a life, but enough to prove she didn't have one here anymore. Up on the raised chair, Alpha Ronin watched with the calm cruelty of someone about to decide another person's fate without feeling a thing. He didn't even need to stand. He didn't have to. The whole hall bowed to him. Ayla, he called, and her name sounded like a verdict. She stopped a few steps from the stone circle in the center, where bonding ceremonies were held. That circle looked cold just sitting there, and she wondered how many forced promises it had heard. You know why you've been summoned, Ronin went on, like he was reading a report instead of breaking a life. Ayla wet her lips. Her throat was so dry it hurt. I do, Alpha, she answered, eyes lowered. Because that was how a female with no standing survived. A murmur slid through the room, short and poisonous. She knew why. Everyone did. It wasn't just that she'd slipped out of the beta's quarters. It wasn't just that she'd been gone all night. It was what their noses were telling them. The scent of a powerful alpha had touched hers. And in a small, proud pack like this, that was an insult. You returned at dawn, Ronan said, leaning forward slightly. With a male's scent on your skin, and without permission. And worse, with a scent that belongs to no one here. Ayla felt her face burn. Shame climbed her throat like fever. It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned. But explaining would be pointless. In that hall, explanations were just another way to beg. I got lost in the woods, she lied, because the truth would be more dangerous than the lie. Ronan lifted an eyebrow like he was amused. Lost, he repeated. The word loaded with mockery. And somehow you got lost all the way into a stranger's bed. Smothered laughter spread. Ayla didn't lift her head, but she felt every laugh like a slap. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to rewind time and rip the impulsiveness out of herself, the hunger to be touched gently, the weakness of believing in one beautiful moment inside an ugly life. Because the truth was simple. Ayla had not been raised to have choices. She'd been raised to obey, to work, to be grateful she wasn't thrown away. You know what happens to a female who brings disgrace to Grey Vale, Ronan said. And now the hall felt even bigger, like the ceiling had lifted just to make room for her humiliation. Ayla breathed slowly, one step at a time, one word at a time. I do. Then understand this too, he continued, and flicked his hand. Almost immediately, two alphas stepped toward the circle. The first was Alpha Dren, old, heavy-bellied, with eyes that looked at females like objects. The second was Alpha Mael, too young to have that much cruelty in his smile, known for breaking wills as easily as he broke bones. Ayla's stomach turned. By pack law, Ronan announced, you can't simply be cast out to become rogue. That would stain Grey Vale's honor. So I'm offering you an honorable exit. You will be claimed by one of them today. Ayla blinked slowly, like blinking might make the words vanish. Her voice failed. Then she tried again, with the last scraps of dignity she had. Can I refuse? The hall seemed to tilt, a silence full of teeth. Ronan smiled, and there was no warmth in it. You can refuse, and be judged for violating territorial order, which in practice is just another way of saying you'll die alone outside these walls. Ayla felt pressure in her chest, like she'd swallowed a stone. She looked up for a second at the faces around her. Some held pity. Most held satisfaction. Because watching someone fall made others feel safer standing. And then, while she tried to breathe without shaking, something impossible cut through the air. A scent. It didn't come from Ronan, or the two men, or any warrior in Grey Vale. It was the smell of winter, pine, and a far-off storm, as if the forest itself had walked into the room. Ayla's body reacted before her mind did. She turned, and the moment the great doors opened with a heavy groan, it felt like the world held its breath with her. A man stepped in. Not a common alpha. He was too tall for that place, like the hall had been built too small on purpose just so he would stand out. His dark coat was immaculate, like it swallowed the light. And his eyes were a deep gold, almost amber, but cold at the edges like heated metal. Ayla felt the hair lift at the back of her neck, because she knew those eyes. Not from up close, from legend. Alpha King Kale, the northern ruler. The wolf other packs offered alliances to out of fear, not pride. The same man who'd sat beside her the night before in a grimy roadside bar, like he was just a traveler, and listened without interrupting when she said sometimes it was better not to exist than to exist as property. The same man who later, in the dark of a room, hadn't treated her like a thing. It can't be him, but it was. And worse, or better, and that was what tore her apart. He was looking straight at Ayla like the rest of the hall was just scenery. Ronan stood so fast his chair scraped. "Your Majesty," he said, and his tone was different now. Forced respect, well-trained fear. The Alpha King didn't answer right away. First he swept his gaze across the room, slow, like he was measuring walls, people, and lies. Only then, in a low, steady voice, he asked, "Is this a ceremony or a trial?" No one dared laugh. No one dared breathe too loud. Ayla felt her heart pounding in her ears. Ronan swallowed hard. "An internal matter, Your Majesty." Kale took another step, and his scent grew stronger, filling the space around Ayla like an invisible presence. She didn't step back, but that was from lack of air, not courage. "Internal," Kale repeated, and his voice was too calm to be safe. "Interesting. Because what I see is a female being cornered, and two alphas being presented as a solution when they look more like punishment." Ayla closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Because that was it. Exactly. When she opened them again, Kale was closer. Not close enough to touch her. Close enough that she could hear the difference between his breathing and everyone else's. Close enough that she remembered, with cruel clarity, what it had felt like to be safe for a few minutes. "What's your name?" he asked. Ayla tried to speak, and for a second nothing came out. Then it came. Small. "Ayla." Kale nodded once like he stored it somewhere inside himself, and then he leaned just enough that only she could hear. His voice dropped even lower, no threat in it. Urgency. Decision. "Come with me," he whispered. "Now." Ayla froze. Because under the words she felt something else. The certainty this wasn't impulse. This was a move. Kings don't show up by accident. "I can't," she mouthed, barely moving her lips. They won't," Kale cut in, still low. "Not if you're under my protection." Ayla's legs went weak again, but for a different reason. Royal protection. Impossible. Too big. Too dangerous. And yet, it was the first time in years someone offered her an exit that didn't feel like a different kind of cage. Kale straightened and, without looking at Ronan, spoke to the entire hall. "This female will not be claimed here." Ronan tried to protest, but the sound died before it formed. Kale held out his hand, open, steady, waiting. And with the whole world watching, Ayla realized her life had split into two moments. Before that hand, and after. She swallowed shame. She swallowed fear. She stepped forward. When her fingers touched his, heat flashed through her skin, like something invisible had been lit. And for the first time since dawn, Ayla felt something other than humiliation. She felt omen. Like, in that exact touch, some ancient law, one she didn't even know had just woken up. And deep in her chest, a ridiculous thought hit like a drum. If I go with him, there's no going back. Chapter 2. The touch still burned on Ayla's skin when Alpha King Kale started walking, and she was forced to follow. On the first step, she nearly stumbled, because her body was still trapped inside the stone circle, inside the incense, inside Ronan's stare slicing into her back like a blade. On the second step, she heard the hall explode into voices, like the whole pack suddenly remembered all at once that they could speak. But Kale didn't slow. He didn't look back. He didn't explain. He simply let her out like the argument was already over. And still, as they crossed the long corridor to the doors, Ayla felt fear trying to hook her ankle. If I leave, I become an enemy. If I leave, I become a reason for war. If I leave, I become someone with nowhere left to go. When the doors shut behind them, night air hit her face like cold water. Wind moved through the courtyard, and the wet, dark scent of trees felt more honest than anything inside that hall. Ayla stopped on the stone steps, because the outside world felt too big after an hour spent being small. Only then did she notice how many guards were there. Men and women in black armor stamped with the northern symbol. Wolves with the posture of people who didn't ask permission. Only delivered reality. They didn't look at Ayla the way Grey Veil did. There was no pleasure in humiliating her. There was assessment, vigilance, and in a few eyes, cautious curiosity. Kale tipped his head once and a guard approached immediately, like he'd been waiting for this since before she was born. "Ready the carriage," Kale said, not loud, but his voice carried effortlessly across the courtyard. "Yes, Your Majesty," the guard answered without hesitation. Ayla swallowed hard. The word majesty still hadn't fit inside her. The night before, he'd been just a man, dangerous, intense, but still human. Now, under the torches and surrounded by his guard, he became what he'd always been, the Alpha King. And that changed everything. Kale looked at Ayla like he'd finally remembered she also needed to breathe. "You're shaking," he said. It was a simple statement. And still, it sounded strangely intimate, because no one in Grey Vale noticed when Ayla shook. They only waited for her to stop. Ayla tightened her grip on her bag. I don't know what's happening," she admitted, and the honesty escaped before she could hide it. "I don't know why you're here, and I don't know what you want from me." The last part slipped out low, carrying a shame that wasn't only social, it was physical, because she remembered. She remembered how the small room had felt huge when he walked in, how he'd paused, like he was asking without words whether she wanted it. And she had. Kale took his time answering. First he looked at the courtyard, then at the steps, like he was calculating not just the escape route, but the least violent way to break an entire tradition. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Inside, you didn't have a choice," he said. "And I don't watch that without intervening." Ayla blinked, because it sounded impossible. Kings didn't save nameless females. Kings didn't cross territories to stop a humiliating ceremony. Kings didn't risk themselves for someone they didn't even know. "You don't know me," she whispered, almost accusing. Kale nodded, like he agreed with the cruel part of reality. "I didn't know your face," he said. "But I know the kind of world that makes a female reach the point where death feels better than a forced bond." Ayla's chest tightened. She wanted to say it wasn't that dramatic, that she was just tired, that maybe she could endure a little longer. But the truth was worse. She'd endured too much, and somehow Kale had seen it in minutes. The carriage appeared in the courtyard moments later, and Ayla had the feeling time here obeyed the king. It was big, dark, with worked metal edges and lanterns along the sides. The horses were massive, and the sound of hooves on stone felt like a warning. Now it's real. The guard opened the door. Ayla froze, because climbing in meant telling Grey Vale she would never be theirs again. Behind her, voices were approaching, doors opening, footsteps, and before Ayla could turn, Kale had moved. He placed himself between her and the hall steps, like his body was a wall. Not wild, he didn't roar, didn't threaten, didn't flash claws, but firm enough to make it clear no one was getting past him. Ronan appeared at the top of the steps with the two alphas who'd been offered as her honorable exit. Dren and Mile, both wearing the face of men about to lose a prize. "Your Majesty," Ronan said, the word wrapped in velvet poison. "With all respect, this female belongs to Grey Vale. She violated our laws." Kale didn't look at him right away. First he placed a hand at Ayla's back, not pushing, only marking presence, like a silent reminder. "You're not alone." Then, without raising his voice, he said, "A female doesn't belong to any place as property." The hall behind Ronan seemed to choke. Ayla realized, with a delayed shock, that sentence was more dangerous than any threat, because it challenged the entire world. Ronan's jaw tightened. "And still, Your Majesty, tradition," Kale cut in, and his calm was the most frightening thing in the night, "is exactly what rots a kingdom from the inside." Dren stepped forward and Ayla's instinct screamed. He smelled like old power and hunger for ownership. "She was destined for me," he said, like Ayla was an object on a table. Kale turned his head slowly, and the gold of his eyes seemed to darken. "Destined?" he repeated. It was one word, and still Dren backed up half a step, like he'd heard a roar. Ayla understood then. Kale did something few alphas could do. He controlled himself by choice, not because he lacked strength, and that restraint was the real warning sign. Mile tried to smile. "Your Majesty, no one wants to disrespect you, but it's about order. If she leaves, other females will think they can..." They can, Kale cut in. And this time he finally looked at Ronan. Other females can. They can say no. They can choose. And if Grey Veil doesn't know how to live with that, that's not their problem. Ayla felt something hot rise in her throat. Half relief, half fear. Because for the first time someone had said out loud what she only thought in the dark. Ronan drew a breath like he was trying to keep his dignity in front of the inevitable. "You can't take her like this," he insisted. And now there was a thread of desperation. "You're provoking a territorial conflict." Kale didn't deny it. "I'm preventing a crime," he said, "and Grey Veil will learn the difference." Then he tipped his head just enough that Ayla could hear, even with everyone close. "Get in the carriage," he said, low. Now. Ayla wanted to ask where they were going, wanted to ask the price, wanted to ask whether this was protection or just another cage painted gentle. But when she looked up at Ronan, Dren, and Mael, her body answered for her. She wanted to live, and to live, she had to leave. Ayla climbed into the carriage. The inside smelled like clean leather and dried herbs. Warm. Too comfortable for someone used to sleeping on straw. She sat on the bench opposite, hands still clenched around her bag like letting go would let go of the last piece of who she was. A second later, Kale stepped in, and when the door closed, the world stayed outside. For a few moments, there was only motion. The horses shifting, wheels creaking, a whip snap in the air. Then the carriage rolled, slow at first, then with decision. Ayla felt the sway, and with it, something inside her shifted, like an old piece of her snapped loose forever. Kale sat across, upright, hands on his knees. He looked as comfortable in silence as a lone wolf in snow. Ayla tried to breathe, but her throat stayed tight. And the more she tried not to look, the more her eyes returned to him. Because there was one question that throbbed louder than all the others. What about last night? Kale broke the silence like he'd heard the thought. "You ran," he said. Ayla swallowed. That one word flashed images. The bar, the room, dawn, and her slipping away before he woke because she couldn't bear being seen as someone who had offered herself. I didn't know who you were," she said, voice unsteady. "If I had known, I never would have—" She stopped, unable to say invited, unable to say kissed, unable to say wanted. Kale didn't smile. No sarcasm. "If you'd known, you would have said no," he finished. And there was something strange there. Not anger, but bitter understanding. Ayla closed her eyes for a second. "Yes," she admitted. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them had said. Minutes later, when Grey Veil's lights were far behind them, Ayla noticed something that made her skin go cold. She still felt his touch on her hand. The memory was there, but beneath it, there was a new pulse. Subtle, like something inside her chest was answering a presence it shouldn't be able to reach. Ayla pressed a hand to her sternum, confused. "What is that?" she asked, more to herself than him. But Kale heard, and his face shifted slightly, like the question confirmed a fear he'd been carrying alone. "You're feeling it," he said, voice lowering. "More than you should." Ayla opened her eyes slowly. "Feeling what?" Kale took half a beat longer than normal to answer, and Ayla realized he was choosing words carefully, like handling a blade. "There's an ancient law," he began. "Not Grey Veil's. Older than packs and borders. And when it wakes, it doesn't ask permission." Ayla went still, because he didn't sound like he was telling a story. He sounded like he was warning her. What law? Kale held her gaze, and for the first time since he'd entered the carriage, Ayla saw a flicker of vulnerability cross the king's mask. "The law of the scent trail," he said. "A rare bond that can be born when two souls touch before the moon allows it." Ayla's heart jumped. That's impossible," she whispered. "I'm nobody. You're you," Kale cut in, and the firmness made her chest ache. And apparently that was enough. The carriage hit a rough patch in the road, and Ayla rocked forward. Instinctively, she braced a hand on the bench, and her wrist caught the lantern light. That's when she saw it. A thin line, almost invisible, drawing itself across her skin like it was being written in that very moment. a delicate silver mark, pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. Ayla stopped breathing. "Kale?" she said, and his name came out like she'd been saying it forever. "What is that?" Kale leaned in, and for a moment his presence filled the small space. Inevitable, like winter arriving. He didn't touch her wrist. He only looked. And when he spoke, his voice sounded like a vow. "It's the beginning," he said. "And if I'm right, the entire kingdom will catch your scent." Ayla felt cold slide down her spine. "Why?" Kale lifted his gaze back to hers, hard and protective at the same time. "Because when the law of the scent trail wakes," he answered, "it announces one thing: someone has been recognized, and that someone can't be hidden anymore." Ayla swallowed, and her wrist kept glowing faintly like her skin was whispering a prophecy. And in that moment, carriage running into darkness, gray veil falling behind, Ayla knew one thing for sure. She'd run once. But after tonight, running wouldn't be enough. Chapter 3. When the carriage rounded the last curve before the climb, Ayla's stomach dropped. It wasn't just the height of the road or the way the wheels groaned over stone. It was because ahead, the northern castle rose like something alive. A fortress of dark stone against a starless sky, towers too tall and walls too thick, like they'd been built to keep the world itself out. And even before she saw the gates, Ayla could feel the place. The air here was different. It smelled like old ice and iron. And beneath that was something else, a kind of energy she couldn't name, but that raised gooseflesh on her skin like the wind carried a warning. Ayla pressed her wrist with the silver mark, trying to hide the glow under her sleeve. But no matter how hard she tried, she still felt the soft pulse, like the line had a will of its own. Someone will see. The carriage slowed, and the sound of the gate opening came like a long, heavy groan. Outside, guards formed two perfect silent rows. All wore the same symbol on their chests. All smelled like disciplined power. And still, when the vehicle stopped completely, Ayla noticed something worse. They weren't just obeying, they were scenting. Their noses moved almost imperceptibly, like they were searching the air for invisible confirmation. And when the door opened, their eyes didn't go to Kale first. They went to her. Ayla felt her face burn, but not from shame this time. From fear. Because fear had transformed into something else since the mark appeared. An uncomfortable certainty that her body was no longer a secret, that her skin was telling a story she hadn't authorized. Kale stepped down first. His movement was simple, steady, and the entire courtyard seemed to adjust to the king's presence like it was the natural law of things. Only then did he extend his hand to Ayla. Ayla hesitated for a second, and the second felt too long. She wanted to step down alone, to prove to herself she wasn't rescued property. But when she put her foot out and the cold hit hard, her legs wobbled slightly. It was just a small tremor, almost imperceptible. Still, Kale noticed, and without making a show of it, he took her hand like he was only helping someone down a step, not holding together the dignity of a woman about to shatter. The touch was warm, stable, and when his fingers closed around hers, the mark on Ayla's wrist flared. Not as pain, but as answer. She breathed deep, forcing air down to her chest, like that might keep panic from exploding in her throat. "Don't look at them like you're guilty," Kale said low, without turning his face. "You didn't do anything wrong." Ayla almost laughed, a short sound without humor. I exist," she answered, also low. "That's always been enough to be wrong in Gray Vale." Kale didn't answer right away. But she felt something move through the silence between them, like her words had touched an old place inside him. They crossed the courtyard, and with every step, Ayla felt the castle approaching like a patient predator. The high windows looked like eyes, the corridors like mouths, and she, too small for all this, was walking in by choice. When they reached the inner doors, a woman was waiting. She was tall, shoulders squared, hair pulled into a tight braid. A thin scar cut through one eyebrow, and her stare had the flat steadiness of someone who didn't impress easily, not even with legends. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing just enough to honor rank. "Commander Soren, The guard is ready, the council as well. Ayla's heart kicked. Council? Kale nodded once. Now. Ayla swallowed. I'm going with you? She asked, hating the fragility in her own voice. Kale turned his face toward her, and for a beat, the gold in his eyes softened, the metal giving way to something human. You won't be questioned like a criminal, he said. But you will be seen, and I'm not going to pretend that won't have consequences. Ayla felt the ground give a little. Seen as what? Kale breathed slowly, like he was choosing not to lie. As the woman who was with me the night the law woke. Her stomach tightened. The castle seemed to grow colder with it. And still he continued. I won't throw you to wolves. Not mine. Not gray veils. He tilted his head, and his voice dropped even lower, just for her. But you need to trust me enough to stand beside me when they ask. Ayla didn't know if she had that kind of courage. Most days she barely had the courage to breathe without apologizing. And yet, remembering his steady grip in the courtyard, she felt a small, dangerous thought latch onto her ribs. Maybe he won't break me. And for Ayla, that was already a lot. The council chamber was a world apart. The moment Ayla stepped in, the smell changed. Cleaner, colder, like freshly washed stone. The ceiling rose high above, and there was a circle of carved chairs marked with ancient symbols. At the far end, a massive window framed the dark sky, and the moon, nearly full, watched with the same patient cruelty as people. 5 figures sat waiting. Not fragile elders. Wolves old enough to carry wars in their voices, and young enough to still rule with clenched fists. When Kale entered, they all rose. Your Majesty, they said as one. Ayla stayed one step behind him, but she didn't hide. Because in that moment she understood. If she shrank, if she made herself smaller, if her body begged forgiveness before her mouth did, they would swallow her whole. And she'd been swallowed too many times already. The man in the center, white beard, coal dark eyes, looked straight at Ayla. So this is her. The word her fell like a stone. Ayla felt shame try to rise, automatic and addicted. But before she could lower her head, Kale spoke. Her name is Ayla. Short sentence. Heavy protection. The elder didn't look offended. Only interested. Ayla, he repeated, tasting the sound. A female from Grey Vale. No significant bloodline. No political tie. And yet here she stands, with a mark forming on her wrist. Ayla's blood turned cold. How did he know? And then she realized it wasn't knowledge. It was scent. Instinct. The kind of perception she'd always feared. The elder rose slowly. Your Majesty, he said, respectful on the surface, pressure underneath. What happened on the road? Why did the law of the scent trail wake now? Why? With her. Ayla felt her whole body stiffen. With her. Like she was a mistake. A bad calculation. Kale went still for a heartbeat too long. And Ayla knew. He could lie. He could call it strategy. He could call it bait. He could say anything that reduced responsibility. But he didn't lie. Because I chose her, Kale said. Ayla forgot how to breathe. The chamber seemed to hold its breath with her. Not to use her, Kale continued, voice firmer. Not as a political move, but because she was about to be destroyed by a cowardly system. And because he paused for the smallest instant, and in that instant Ayla saw truth cut across his face like a blade. Because my wolf recognized something in hers. The elder narrowed his eyes. Her wolf? Disbelief sharpened the words. She doesn't carry an alpha scent. She doesn't. The sentence died when Ayla felt it. Heat surged from the mark and ran up her arm like contained fire. She gasped, clutching her forearm as the silver line brightened, alive, provoked by doubt. And in that moment, her scent shifted. Subtle. But the room reacted. Eyes changed. Noses moved. One of the counselors, a woman with clear eyes and elegant posture, tilted her head in silent shock. The woman murmured, she isn't Beta. The world tilted. Ayla's stomach fell. I am, Ayla whispered automatically. I always have been. Kale snapped his gaze to her too fast. and for the first time she saw real fear in him. Not fear for himself, fear for her. Because if she wasn't Beta, then Grey Veil had hidden something powerful. Then someone had lied. Then someone had made her a ghost on purpose. And worse, if the North decided what she was before she did, the kingdom would claim her in a different way. Ayla's hands trembled. Air felt too thin. The elder's voice sharpened, polished like a weapon. Your Majesty, if the law has woken, others can sense it. Others can hunt. And that means, his eyes fixed on the mark like it was proof. Grey Veil will demand her return. Return, like lost property. Ayla saw the stone circle again. Dren's smile. Mael stepping closer. Ronan deciding without feeling. The pain hit so hard she almost folded. That's when Kale moved. He stepped forward, just enough to place himself between her and them. Not as owner, but as shield. They can demand whatever they want, Kale said, and the room seemed to straighten with his voice. But they won't touch her, not without going through me. Tears burned behind Ayla's eyes. Fast, humiliating. Because no one had ever said they won't touch her for her sake. People said don't touch because she belonged to someone. Kale said it like it was dignity. Like it was choice. Like it was life. The clear-eyed councilwoman leaned forward. And what does Ayla want? She asked suddenly. Silence slammed down. Ayla felt the weight of the question crush her chest. Because it was a question no one asked in Grey Veil. And for one short, cruel moment, she didn't know how to answer. Wanting was a language she never got to learn. She opened her mouth, closed it, swallowed. And then the truth slipped out in a thin thread. I want not to go back. The room reacted like she'd thrown a match. Ayla kept going because now that the first sentence existed, swallowing the rest would feel like dying. I want to be treated like a person. I want to choose. I don't want to be sold. I don't want to be punished for existing. Her voice cracked and the tears finally came. I just want a place where I don't have to apologize all the time. The silence after wasn't empty. It was thick. Dangerous. Kale turned toward her and his look split something in her chest. Not pain, recognition. Then he faced the council. She spoke, Kale said, firm. Now you heard her. The elder held still, then nodded slowly. Very well. He drew a breath. Then we treat this as it must be treated. He lifted his hand. Commander Soren. From tonight on, Ayla remains under Northern Guard. No messenger enters without search. No visitor arrives unannounced. And above all, his gaze settled on Ayla. Someone will try to hunt that trail. Ayla went cold. Hunt? She managed. This time Kale answered without softening. When the law wakes, it draws the attention of old enemies. He lifted her wrist carefully, just enough to show the faint glow. And some will believe you're a key. Ayla's world swayed. A key to what? Kale hesitated. And in that tiny gap, Ayla understood. There were things he wasn't ready to say in front of the council. He lowered her wrist like he was giving her back a piece of herself. To a war that's been asleep for a long time, he said finally. And that might wake because of you. The council began talking all at once. Roots, borders, risks. Their words turned into distant noise, because all Ayla could hear was her own blood and the word war hitting the walls of her skull. Then Kale leaned close, low, creating a small private world inside the vast room. Look at me. Ayla obeyed without realizing she was obeying. His gold eyes held hers, steady as ground. You won't face this alone, Kale said. Not even if I have to cross the entire kingdom to prove it. Ayla trembled. And for the first time in years, a part of her believed him. But then Soren stepped in and murmured something to the elder. Ayla's blood froze again because the elder lifted his head, eyes hard. Your Majesty. A messenger arrived. From Grey Veil. Ayla's heart dropped. He brought one statement. A formal declaration from Alpha Ronan. The elder paused, letting the words land like a blow. Return the female. Or we'll come get her. Ayla lost her breath. And on her wrist, the mark flared brighter, as if the law itself answered the threat. Chapter 4. The messenger's news hung in the air like an axe. Ayla couldn't say how long she stood there staring at the elder while the words, "or we'll come get her," hammered and echoed inside her skull. Maybe it was only a second. Maybe an eternity. But when the council started talking again, overlapping voices, strategies, territory names, everything sounded distant, like she was underwater. She only came back to herself when she felt Kale's hand touch, lightly, her elbow. It wasn't a possessive touch. It wasn't a push. It was a silent warning, as if he was saying, "Breathe, stay here, don't get lost." Ayla breathed in with difficulty, and the air came in too cold. The marked wrist kept pulsing, and now she felt something new beneath the glow. A hum of attention, like the entire castle had turned toward her even when no one was speaking directly to her. Commander Soren approached Kale with a scroll in hand. She spoke low, but Ayla caught a few words. Posts, border, double patrol. Kale nodded once, and then, like he was making a decision that was already ripe, he turned to the council. "This meeting ends here," he said, and his voice didn't ask for agreement. There were contained protests, of course. A younger counselor opened his mouth as if to argue. The clear-eyed councilwoman, the same one who'd asked what Ayla wanted, watched in silence, as if measuring the line between authority and care. The central elder, however, only inclined his chin. "Then do what needs to be done, Your Majesty." Kale didn't respond. He only held the elder's gaze for a moment, a long, dense moment, and then turned to Ayla. "Come," he said. The simple word cut through Ayla in a strange way, because in Grey Vale, "come" meant obey. Here, it sounded like, "Follow me. I won't let you go." Still, her legs faltered when she started walking. Not because of the size of the castle, or the guards, or the echo of footsteps in the corridor, but because of an image that kept returning, Ronan at the top of the steps, saying she had no choice. And now, suddenly, she had too many choices. And that was frightening too. Outside the council chamber, the corridor seemed darker than before, like night had advanced. Torches flickered, casting shadows that stretched across the floor, and Ayla felt her own breath fail when she noticed that some guards, seeing her pass, lowered their heads, not in submission, but in respect to the king. And, by extension, to her. Ayla wanted to believe it was for her, but fear whispered, "It's for what you represent now. A mark, a law, a problem." When they reached a quieter wing, Kale finally slowed his pace. Commander Soren stayed behind at a respectful distance, like an armed shadow. It was clear. Kale wanted privacy, but he didn't want to leave Ayla unprotected even for one hallway. He stopped before a double door, simple, without excessive ornament. The stone around it was older, and there was a symbol carved on the side. Two intertwined lines forming an incomplete circle. Ayla felt her wrist burn when she saw it. "Here," Kale said, and pushed the door open. The room was quiet. Not luxurious in an aggressive way, like the stories Grey Vale told about kings. It was comfortable, yes. Wide bed, unlit fireplace, a table with water and bread. But what struck Ayla most was the fact that here there were no stairs, no voices, no smell of judgment. It was, for a moment, a place where she could exist without being under a blade. She took 2 steps inside and stopped. The bag was still in her hand, like letting it go would mean letting go of the last thread of control. Kale closed the door behind them, and when the click of wood sounded, Ayla felt her body react as if it had been authorized to truly tremble. "They'll come," she said, and her voice came out low, broken. "Ronan will come. He'll send people. They'll say I belong to the Vale. They'll say I—" She couldn't finish, because a wave of old humiliation rose all at once. Humiliation and fear. So mixed, they became one thing. Kale didn't approach immediately. He stayed a few steps away, as if he knew proximity might frighten her, as if he chose deliberately not to dominate the space. "Yes," he said, and his honesty hurt. "They'll try." Ayla laughed without humor, a short laugh that almost turned into a sob. "Then why did you bring me?" she asked. And now there was desperation in the question. Why involve me in this? You had a kingdom. You had your rules. You had your life. I was just a female in an alley. Kale breathed slowly. And when he spoke, his voice came different. Less king, more man. I was in Grey Vale because of a trail, he said. Ayla frowned, confused. A trail? Kale leaned slightly on the table, like the weight of what he was about to say also leaned on him. For months, I've been following signs of something ancient waking, he explained. A magic that doesn't belong to any specific pack. It crosses borders. It infiltrates small places because nobody looks at small places. Ayla felt her wrist tingle again, like it was responding to the words. And what does that have to do with me? Kale took a second. I didn't know it had anything to do with you, he confessed. Until I sensed you. Ayla stopped, heart beating too hard. Kale raised his gaze, holding hers with firmness. In that bar, you spoke like someone who's been broken and still refuses to accept breaking as destiny, he said. And his throat moved. I recognized that. Not as a pretty story. As a force. Ayla felt tears threaten again. Not from feeling praised, but from feeling seen. It was a different kind of pain. The pain of someone touching the right wound and, instead of laughing, treating it carefully. I'm not strong, she whispered. Kale took one more step closer, slowly. You walked into that hall, he said. You heard your sentence, and you still stood. That's strength. Ayla swallowed, but her body kept shaking. And now? She asked. Now that they know where I am. Now that... She lifted her wrist, and the silver glow pulsed like it breathed. Now that this appeared. Kale looked at the mark with a seriousness that made Ayla feel cold. Now we need clear rules, he said. The word rules made Ayla stiffen. In Grey Vale, rules were what hurt. Kale seemed to notice and adjusted his tone. Rules to protect you, Ayla, and to give you choice. He breathed. I'm going to say something and you're going to answer me with the truth. Ayla nodded, hesitant. Do you want to leave? He asked. Now, tonight, before Grey Vale gets any closer. The question fell inside her like a stone in still water, because the instinctive answer was yes. Running was what she knew how to do. Running was the only talent the world had left her. But then she thought about the word get, thought about men crossing the forest, scenting her trail, pulling her by the hair, thought about hiding again, alone, without walls, without protection. And beneath that, she thought about Kale's hand extended, demanding nothing. Ayla breathed with difficulty. I don't know, she admitted, and the shame of not knowing burned her. I only know I can't go back. Kale nodded, like he'd expected that. Then stay, he said. Ayla's eyes widened. Stay here? In the castle? In my territory, Kale corrected. Under my direct protection. That means no one takes you without going through me, and it means I'll face Grey Vale if they try. Ayla felt a new panic. You'll go to war over me? Kale closed his hand slowly, like he was holding anger and choice inside his fist. I'll stop them from turning you into an example, he said. And if that requires force, then I use force. But not against you. The final phrase was said with a firmness that made Ayla tremble differently. And what do you want from me? She asked finally. The question that had been burning since the carriage. You don't do this for free. Nobody does. Kale stayed still for a moment. Then he answered with an honesty that seemed to cost. I want you to be safe. First. He breathed. And I want to understand why the law chose you. Because, Ayla, it doesn't choose by accident. Ayla looked at her wrist and for the first time felt something beyond fear. An old, dense fury, directed not at Kale, but at the world that had tried to erase her. And if I don't want to be chosen by any law? She whispered. Kale moved a little closer but stopped before invading her space. Then we fight the law too, he said. If it's possible. But until we find out, you stay alive. Ayla let out air she didn't know she was holding. And before she could stop herself, the words escaped. I'm afraid of you. The silence that came after was heavy. Ayla felt immediate shame. Because saying that to the king's face felt like suicide. But Kale didn't explode. He only stared at her with quiet seriousness. That makes sense, he said. You were taught to fear alphas, and I'm the biggest one. He tilted his head. So I'm not going to ask for blind trust. I'm going to ask for time. Ayla blinked. Time? 1 week, Kale said. 1 week under my protection. No touch, no demands, no approach you don't choose. You'll eat, sleep, breathe. You'll have clothes. You'll have a place that's yours. You'll have guards who don't treat you like guilt. And at the end of the week, you decide. Ayla felt her chest tighten. Decide what? Kale held her gaze. Whether you stay and face this with me, or leave with resources and escort to a neutral territory Greyvale can't touch. Ayla went still. The offer seemed too good to be real. And you'd let me go? She asked, suspicious. Something dark passed quickly through Kale's eyes. Pain? Frustration? But he controlled it. Yes, he said. Because you won't be my prisoner, or my property, or my penance. Ayla felt tears fall without permission. Because that broke something inside her. Kale took one small step forward. May I? He asked, indicating the tears, like he was asking permission even to wipe her face. Ayla nodded, almost imperceptibly. Kale touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, a brief, careful gesture, and the touch was so gentle it hurt more than any brutality. Sleep, he said low. Tomorrow will be a long day. Ayla swallowed. Will you stay here? Kale hesitated, and the hesitation strangely made Ayla trust a little more. Because people who fake don't hesitate. I'll stay outside the door, he said. With guards. No one comes in. No one. Ayla nodded, and her body finally gave a little. She set the bag on the chair, like she was putting down a piece of fear. When Kale left, the room felt bigger and emptier. Still, for the first time in years, the emptiness didn't come with abandonment. It came with protection. Ayla lay on the bed without fully undressing, like she did when she was afraid of being surprised. And as the fireplace crackled faintly in the distance, she closed her eyes. That's when she felt it. Something warm, soft, crossing her chest like an echo. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a thought. It was emotion. And she knew, with an almost humiliating shock, that it wasn't coming from her. It was from Kale. Worry. Vigilance. And beneath it all, a fierce determination that had nothing to do with possession. The law connected us. Ayla brought her hand to her wrist and felt the mark pulse like its own heart. And before she fell asleep, she thought, if I stay, I'll be hunted. If I run, I'll be hunted anyway. So maybe the difference is who'll be with me when they come. And that idea, small and absurd, was the first spark of hope Ayla allowed to exist. Chapter 5. Morning came without mercy. Ayla woke before sunrise, body tense like she'd spent the whole night running. For a second, she didn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft, the air was too clean, and the silence had a kind of order she'd never known. Then she heard footsteps outside the door. Not sneaking footsteps, firm steps. Guards. She breathed deep, and the memory came back whole. Greyvale, the council, the threat, the mark. Ayla raised her wrist. The silver line was still there, subtle, like it had slept with her. Still, when she touched it, she felt a faint warmth spread through her fingers. Alive. A soft knock came at the door. Ayla froze. Ayla? Kale's voice came from the other side, low, controlled. May I come in? The question, the permission, caught Ayla off guard again. She took half a second to answer, because instinct still expected him to enter without asking. Yes, she said, and her voice came out small. The door opened slowly. Kale entered alone, without armor, without cloak, without that legendary look. He wore a simple dark shirt and pants, hair tied back carelessly. Still, even like this, his presence filled the room. He stopped at a respectful distance, like the night before. Did you sleep? He asked. Ayla almost lied. It was automatic. Say yes, so you don't cause trouble. But she remembered. He said 1 week. He said choices. He said truth. So she breathed and answered. Sort of. Kale nodded. like that was normal. "It'll get better," he said. "Today, I need to show you some things. Not to scare you, to prepare you." Ayla felt her stomach tighten. "Prepare for what?" Kale didn't dodge. "For what's coming," he said. "Grey Veil will send official emissaries before they send warriors. They'll try to convince you to come back. If they can't, they'll change their approach." Ayla felt her throat close. "They'll say I'm ungrateful," she whispered. "They'll say I shamed the pack. They'll say I deserve punishment." Kale watched her face with a kind of attention that felt like care. "And will you believe them?" The question was like a delicate knife. Ayla opened her mouth and froze, because part of her, the part that had been trained, believed even when it hurt. Believed because it was easier to blame herself than accept the world was cruel without reason. "I don't know," she confessed. Kale tilted his head. "Then we'll work on that too," he said. "Not just the politics. What's in your head? What they did to you." Ayla blinked, and sudden anger rose. "And what did they do to me?" she shot back, sharper than she meant. "I'm not a child." Kale didn't take offense. "No, you're not," he said, calm. "But you were treated like a thing. And things learn to apologize for existing. People don't." Ayla felt her face burn. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary, like when a wound is cleaned and stings. Kale took a step toward the table and pointed to a tray with simple food. "Bread, fruit, cheese. Eat," he said. "Then we're going to the map room." Ayla frowned. "Map room?" "I'm going to show you the kingdom," Kale explained. "Where you are, where Grey Veil can come from. And why—" He hesitated the smallest instant. "Why the law of the scent trail is so feared." The word feared tightened her stomach again. Ayla sat in the chair and took the bread with hands that trembled less than the night before. She ate slowly, because eating in the presence of an alpha had always been a humiliation in Grey Veil. But Kale didn't watch her like someone evaluating. He waited like someone respecting another's time. When she finished, he opened the door and let her leave first. In the corridor, Commander Soren was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Seeing Ayla, her gaze went quickly to the marked wrist, then back to her face. "Not queen yet," Soren murmured, more to herself than them. But already turning into a target. Ayla felt a chill. "What did she mean?" Ayla asked Kale when they started walking. Kale kept his pace steady. "She meant the court will speculate," he answered, "and that enemies will smell opportunity. The law of the scent trail isn't just a bond. It's an announcement." They walked through long corridors, climbed a spiral staircase, and at the end reached a double door guarded by 2 soldiers. As soon as Kale approached, the guards opened without question. The map room was enormous. There was a central table with a detailed map of the entire kingdom, marked with border lines, rivers, forests, and mountains. Candles illuminated strategic points. Walls had smaller maps, notes, and symbols Ayla didn't understand. She stopped, and for a moment forgot her fear, because it was impossible not to feel the weight of the world inside there. "This is my kingdom," Kale said, and his voice dropped lower, like the place demanded respect. "And this," he pointed to a smaller region in the south, "is Grey Veil." Ayla looked at the small point on the map and felt bitter anger. "I was so small even on paper." Kale slid his finger along the routes. "An emissary can arrive in 2 days," he said. "A war party in 4. But before that," he pointed to an old line, almost faded, that cut part of the map like a scar. "There are paths not on the official maps." Ayla frowned. "Secret paths?" Kale nodded. "Ancient trails used during the last Moon War," he explained, "when vampires tried to cross northern territories." Ayla froze. "Vampires?" Kale watched her face like he was measuring how much she knew. "Yes," he confirmed. "They exist. And some of them are still alive. Sleeping. Waiting." The air seemed to get colder. Ayla brought her hand to her wrist. "And this has to do with the mark?" Kale approached the map and touched an ancient symbol, carved in the corner, almost imperceptible. An incomplete circle, the same as on her room's door. "The law of the scent trail was born as a defense," Kale said. It linked two beings so no mind control spell could separate them. It was the moon's answer to prevent mates from being kidnapped and used as keys in rituals. Ayla felt her chest tighten. So, someone might want to use me as a key? Kale didn't deny it. Yes, he said. Because when the law wakes, it doesn't just mark. It opens. It points to something that was hidden. Ayla felt her stomach turn. And why me? Kale stared at the map, but the answer seemed to be inside him, not on paper. I don't know yet, he admitted. And that makes me furious. Because I hate not knowing how to protect what's in front of me. Ayla felt her body react to what's in front of me. Not as romance, but as real care. And that was more dangerous than any threat from Grey Vale, because care created bonds. And bonds created losses. You don't know me, she repeated, quieter now, like she was trying to convince herself. Kale turned his face, and his gaze held hers. I'm starting to, he said. And that only makes me more certain you don't deserve to be returned like property. Ayla felt tears threaten again. That's when a guard rushed in without knocking, face pale. Your Majesty, he said, breathless. An emissary from Grey Vale arrived. And he brought a sealing witch. Ayla's heart stopped. Witch? She whispered. Kale went rigid, and Ayla felt like a silent shock his emotion cut through the room. A cold rage, contained, the kind that comes before war. Bring them to the lesser hall, Kale ordered, and his voice was steel. The guard ran out. Ayla stood frozen, hands cold, wrist glowing a little brighter. Sealing witch. What does that mean? She asked, and her voice came out almost soundless. Kale moved closer to her, and this time he touched her forearm, firm, not invasive, like he wanted to anchor her in the present. It means they didn't come to get you with words, he said. They came to try to prove you belong to Grey Vale through magic. Ayla felt nausea. They'll try to bind me? Kale held her gaze. They'll try, he said, and I'll stop them. Her wrist burned, like the law was responding to imminent danger. And Ayla, for the first time since entering the castle, felt something clear, sharp, and inevitable. The threat now wasn't just Ronan. It was the kind of world that thought it could put a magical collar on a woman and call it law. And as Kale led her out of the map room, Ayla realized the decision to stay or run was already being made by forces bigger than fear. Because if a witch was coming to seal her trail, then the trail was real. And someone, somewhere, was certain Ayla was too valuable to be free. Chapter 6. The Lesser Hall had a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence loaded with crowds and humiliation from Grey Vale. It was the silence of ancient stone and ancient rules, like the castle itself had learned to wait before reacting. The torches were few, and their light was cleaner, less yellow, which made faces sharper, and for that reason, harder to fool. Ayla entered beside Kale and felt the temperature drop, not because of the room, but because of what stood before her. Grey Vale's emissary stood in the center of the hall with rehearsed posture, chest puffed, hands behind his back. He wore Grey Vale's gray sash and the expression of someone who believed he was carrying the law itself in his pocket. Beside him, however, was someone who didn't match arrogance. A woman in dark clothes, hair pulled into a simple bun, eyes that didn't fix on any one place for too long. Like looking too much at anything was dangerous. Her scent was strange, a mix of herbs and ash, and Ayla felt the marked wrist react before she even understood why. The silver glow intensified under her sleeve, like the mark had recognized a natural enemy. Witch. Ayla tried not to back away. Still, her body did what it always did when it felt danger. Became small inside. Guilt came with it. Automatic. Ancient. Like a conditioned reflex. Don't provoke. Don't look. Don't answer. If you behave right, maybe it'll hurt less. Except this time Kale was there, and his presence changed the weight of the air. Commander Soren closed the doors behind them and stayed to the side, silent, watching with that expression of someone who kept a blade inside their gaze. Kale walked to the central chair and didn't sit. He stood. Ayla noticed the detail and felt the message behind it. He wasn't receiving a guest. He was holding a boarder. Your Majesty. The emissary began, and the bow was too shallow to be respect. I am Talon, official emissary of Alpha Ronin. I bring a formal demand. Kale tilted his head, just enough to allow the other to speak, not enough to grant real space. Speak. Talon cleared his throat, like he enjoyed his own role. The female Ayla belongs to Grey Vale by territorial law. She violated a ceremony in progress and must therefore be returned for judgment and internal resolution. The word judgment pulled a shiver down Ayla's neck. She saw herself, for a second, back at the stone circle, and the sound of laughter from inside memory came with it. Ayla pressed her fingers against her own palm, like she could trap the past there. Kale didn't move. She belongs to no one, he said simply. The emissary smiled, like he thought that was just rhetoric. With all respect, Your Majesty, the North doesn't interfere in Grey Vale's internal matters. We've had clear borders for generations. Kale took a step forward. It wasn't an aggressive step. It was an inevitable step. And Ayla realized that in this castle, one step from Kale was heavier than an entire army in Grey Vale. You're wrong, Kale said, and his voice was calm enough to frighten. The North interferes when a border is used as an excuse for abuse. Ayla swallowed hard. The word abuse hadn't been spoken aloud in Grey Vale. There, they called it tradition, order, hierarchy, or they called it deserved. The emissary hardened his smile. Then the matter is simple, he said, and made a contained gesture toward the witch. We brought a sealing witch to prove territorial ownership. We're not asking for blood, not asking for combat, just confirmation. The witch, silent until now, raised her eyes for the first time. When her gaze met Ayla's, Ayla felt a new chill that wasn't pure fear. It was recognition of something deeper. Like this woman had seen many Aylas before. Many females with lowered eyes. Many females about to be bound by magic and called saved. The witch spoke in a low voice, almost emotionless. I don't make judgments. I only seal what the law determines. Ayla felt her stomach turn. I don't want to be sealed, she whispered. But the phrase came out too small. Still, Kale heard. He turned his face toward her slightly, like confirming something silent. Then he returned to the emissary. There will be no seal, Kale said. Talon frowned. Your Majesty, this isn't... Kale interrupted, and there was no increase in volume, just a clean cut. I said no. The emissary hesitated, and Ayla saw the exact moment he realized he'd gone too far. But instead of backing down intelligently, he leaned on the only thing a small man has when facing a great one: theater. Then you assume responsibility for any consequences, Talon said, because if the female isn't returned, Grey Vale will consider this a hostile act. Ayla held her breath. She hated that part of her wanted to give in just to prevent conflict, hated how well-trained the guilt was. Maybe I should go back. Maybe I should prevent war. The witch took a step forward, and Ayla felt her wrist burn hard. The glow cut through the fabric of her sleeve like light underwater. I only need the wrist, the witch said, and her voice was so neutral it seemed even crueler. One touch, one confirmation. It's quick. Ayla backed up half a step by reflex, and without realizing it, ended up brushing her shoulder lightly against Kale's arm. That's where she felt what the law truly did. Because the instant her body sought shelter behind him, a wave crossed the space between them. Like the mark wasn't just a drawing, but a bridge. Ayla felt Kale's emotion, not as an idea, as pure sensation. A cold, controlled fury. A fierce decision to prevent any hand from touching her without consent. And beneath that, something unexpected that made her chest tighten. Fear. He was afraid of failing. Afraid of not arriving in time. Afraid of seeing Ayla taken by hands that would call it law. Ayla's eyes widened, because she'd never felt someone feel fear. For her. Kale raised his hand, stopping the witch's advance without touching her. You won't lay a hand on her, he said. And the tone now was stone. The witch hesitated, and Ayla saw a microsecond of doubt cross her face. Talon rushed to use the hesitation as leverage. It's a legal procedure, Your Majesty, he insisted. If there's nothing to hide, Why fear a seal? Ayla felt the blow of the phrase, not because it was true, but because it was the kind of phrase that always trapped her, the kind that made the victim seem guilty for trying to protect herself. She breathed with difficulty. And then, before she realized she was doing it, Ayla stepped forward. The hall seemed to grow quieter suddenly. Kale turned his face to her, fast, and Ayla felt the question in his gaze. Are you sure? Ayla wasn't sure of almost anything, but she was sure of one thing. If she stayed silent, they'd turn her into an object again. She raised her wrist, letting the glow show. And when she spoke, her voice came trembling. But it came. I have nothing to hide, Ayla said. I have everything to lose. Talon blinked, surprised she spoke. Ayla continued. Because courage, when it came, felt like an animal that needed to run before someone caught it. You talk about law, she said, and the word law burned on her tongue. But Grey Vale's law was always just what the Alpha wanted. And I'm not his thing anymore. I'm not anyone's thing. The witch looked at Ayla for a longer moment, and Ayla saw something in her gaze that hurt, a contained sadness, like this woman had once said the same words and no one had listened. Talon recovered his posture. So you formally refuse to return to Grey Vale? He asked, and his voice had cruel satisfaction, like he was collecting the phrase to use as a weapon. Ayla felt her heart race. If she said yes, Grey Vale would declare war. If she said no, she'd be taken back. Her choices still had claws. She looked at Kale, and his presence was like ground. I refuse, Ayla said finally. Her wrist glowed brighter, like the law confirmed the choice. The emissary opened a thin smile. Perfect, he said. Then it's recorded. Grey Vale won't recognize your protection as legitimate, and we'll come get her. He turned to the witch. Do the seal. The witch didn't move. The emissary frowned. Witch? The woman breathed deep, like she was making a decision that also had a price. I don't seal a female against her will, the witch said, and the phrase fell like stone in the hall. Talon went red. You were paid? I was hired to validate territorial ownership, she interrupted, and for the first time there was steel in her voice. But the seal requires blood consent. Without it, the seal becomes curse. And I don't practice curses in the name of a coward alpha. Ayla held her breath. Kale didn't smile. But Ayla felt, through the bond, silent approval. Talon stepped back, like he was retreating. And then, in a quick motion, he tried to grab Ayla's wrist himself. It was a desperate gesture. Stupid. And still, it happened fast enough for Ayla's body to react with pure panic. But Kale reacted first. He didn't shift, didn't roar. He just moved, and his speed was like cutting wind. Kale's hand caught the emissary's arm in the air and twisted enough to stop the movement without breaking, without blood, but with enough pain to teach. Talon screamed. You dare touch her, Kale said, voice low and deadly. Ayla felt her legs go weak. Kale released the emissary and shoved him back, and Soren was already there, holding Talon like he was a weightless sack. Remove him, Kale ordered. The emissary still tried to speak, but Soren dragged him out like garbage. Ayla stood trembling in the center of the hall, wrist glowing and chest tight. The witch looked at Kale, then at Ayla, like she was weighing their fates. The law of the scent trail is awake, she said quietly, and that calls ancient things. Your Majesty, you know this. Kale nodded. I know. The witch hesitated, then took a step toward Ayla. Ayla backed up slightly, by instinct, but the witch raised her hands, showing she wasn't coming to grab, only to speak. If you want to survive what's coming, the witch said, you need to learn to seal the trail yourself, because others will try to scent you, and some won't come with emissaries. Ayla felt cold down her spine. Who? She asked. The witch looked at Kale. Those who serve the dead moon, she answered, and the word dead made the torch seem to flicker. Kale went very quiet, and Ayla knew, with a stomach clench, that name wasn't legend. It was a real enemy. The witch inclined her head to Ayla. I can teach, she said, but only if you choose. Ayla looked at Kale, seeking guidance. He didn't answer for her. He only held her gaze and let the space exist. Ayla breathed deep, and with her voice still trembling, she said, "I choose to learn." The mark glowed, like it approved, and in that instant, Ayla felt she'd crossed an invisible door. She was no longer just a female running. She was someone beginning to fight. But before anyone could say more, the entire castle shook with a distant sound, like thunder had fallen inside stone. Soren ran in, face pale. "Your Majesty," she said, breathless. "We found a body at the north gate. One of our scouts." Ayla felt her throat close. "Alive?" Kale asked, already hardening. Soren shook her head. "No." And she swallowed. "It wasn't Grey Veil. It was something else. There's a bite mark, but not from a wolf." The silence grew heavy, and Ayla felt cold fear spread. Vampires. The word wasn't said, but the entire castle seemed to think it at once. And on Ayla's wrist, the mark pulsed like it had heard the warning. Chapter 7. The feeling of danger changed shape the instant Kale started walking. It was no longer the human danger of Grey Veil, the danger of judgments, twisted words, laws used as knives. Now it was something older, more predatory, like the forest when it gets too quiet. Ayla walked behind him without noticing when she decided to do it. Soren cleared the way through corridors and guards joined like armed shadows. The castle, which before had seemed only big and cold, now felt alive. Every corner was a question, every door a possible mistake. The witch came along, steps silent, and as they advanced, Ayla noticed she didn't look at the guards like she was afraid of them. She looked at the ceiling and the windows like she feared something else, like the danger wasn't coming from the ground. When they reached the outer courtyard, wind hit hard, and Ayla felt the night bite her skin. The moon was high, but a dark cloud passed slowly, like it was trying to cover it. At the north gate, there was a small cluster of soldiers. No shouting, no chaos. There was that silence of people trained who'd seen too much death to react with noise. When Kale approached, the guards made space. Ayla saw the body on the ground. It was a young scout, maybe a little older than her. The face was pale, the eyes open and empty. There wasn't excess blood spilled, which made everything more frightening. Like the death had been clean. Ayla felt her stomach turn and brought a hand to her mouth by reflex. Kale knelt beside the body. Soren went rigid, holding contained rage. The witch approached the man's neck without touching. "Bite," she confirmed. "And a secondary seal." Ayla frowned. "Seal?" she repeated, almost voiceless. The witch looked at Ayla, and for the first time, her expression became truly grave. "They marked this scout so he would carry something inside the castle," she said. Ayla felt her blood freeze. "Something like what?" The witch didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised her hand slowly, like testing the air. Her fingers trembled, and Ayla felt a shiver cross her own marked wrist. "Like bait," the witch said. "Or like a message." Kale stood slowly, and Ayla saw his face change. It wasn't just anger. It was a kind of cold focus, like when a storm chooses where to fall. "How many guards saw the body before you?" Kale asked. Soren answered immediately. "2. Both are being isolated now." Kale nodded, then looked at the witch. "Can you identify which vampire house this came from?" Ayla held her breath. Kale said, "Vampire house," like it wasn't myth. Like it was a real, organized, dangerous structure. The witch closed her eyes for a second, and Ayla realized she was listening. Not with her ears, with magic. When she opened her eyes, the answer came like a bad whisper. "House Varkos." Soren cursed low. Some guards exchanged tense looks. Ayla felt her throat close. "Are they here because of me?" she asked, and the question came out weaker than she wanted. Kale turned his face to her, and for a moment, Ayla saw the entire war inside his eyes. Not the war outside, but the war of choices he had to make. Protect a kingdom or protect a woman fate put in his path. Kale approached Ayla and stopped one step away, as always. Still, that night, The space between them felt smaller, like danger had shortened distances. "They wouldn't do this for a common female," he said, and the raw honesty of the phrase hurt. "They'd do this for a female linked to the law, because the law opens doors vampires want to cross." The witch moved closer and spoke low, like someone confessing a secret that should stay buried. "The Dead Moon isn't just a name," she said. "It's a faction, an ancient cult. They believe that when the law of the scent trail wakes, the moon is calling a living key to open the seal of the Black Pit." Ayla felt cold in her soul. "Black Pit?" Soren answered first, voice hard. "An ancient prison under the mountains, where things that shouldn't exist were locked away." Ayla swallowed hard. She wanted to say, "This can't be about me," but the mark on her wrist seemed to disagree. It pulsed, alive, like it recognized the name. The witch looked directly at Ayla. "You didn't choose this," she said, "but it chose you. And now they'll come." Ayla breathed with difficulty. She looked at the body on the ground, then at the castle, then at the moon almost covered by cloud, and for the first time, she felt real anger. Not the powerless anger from Grey Vale, which was swallowed and became guilt, an anger that wanted to protect something. "I'm not going back," Ayla said, firmer than expected. "And I'm not going to let them use me as a key." Cale watched her face with a kind of silent attention. "Then you'll learn fast," he said. The witch nodded. "It starts today," she agreed, "before they get closer." That same hour, Ayla was taken to a small room in the basement, where the air was colder and the stone seemed older than the rest of the castle. The path there was through narrow corridors and stairs, and with each step, Ayla felt like she was descending not just physically, but entering the part of the world no one wanted to acknowledge. The room had a circle drawn on the floor with salt and ash. There were small candles at 4 points, and a strong smell of burned rosemary. Ayla stopped at the circle's edge. "I don't know how to do magic," she said, and insecurity returned, trying to pull her back to her usual role. The witch raised her gaze. "You know how to survive," she answered. "That's the same thing, just with different names." Cale stayed near the door, not inside the circle, like making it clear this was hers. Still, Ayla felt his presence as anchor. The witch pointed to Ayla's wrist. "The mark isn't just a bond with him," she said. "It's a trace that sings to those who know how to listen. You need to learn to silence the song." Ayla swallowed and entered the circle. The salt crunched under her shoe. The witch began murmuring ancient words, and Ayla didn't understand any of the meaning, but understood the tone. It was like the woman was asking the world permission to touch without hurting. "Close your eyes," the witch ordered, "and think about what you want to protect." Ayla frowned. "Protect?" "Not run," the witch corrected. "Protect. It's different." Ayla closed her eyes. And without meaning to, the first image that came wasn't the castle, or the kingdom, or the moon. It was Cale holding her arm in the air, stopping the emissary from touching her. It was Cale asking, "May I?" before wiping her tears. It was Cale staying outside the door, like a promise. Ayla felt her chest tighten. "I want to protect this. I want to protect the chance to be treated like a person." Her wrist grew warm. The mark glowed. "Now," the witch said, and her voice seemed to come from far away. "Push that glow inward, like you're closing a window before the storm." Ayla tried. In the first second, nothing happened. In the second, she felt the glow resist, like the mark was an animal that didn't want to be caged. Ayla held her breath, concentrated. And then, with the stubbornness that had kept her alive in Grey Vale, she insisted. Slowly, the heat receded. The mark stopped glowing like a beacon and became a discreet line. Ayla opened her eyes, surprised. The witch nodded, and there was contained pride there. "You did it." Ayla looked at her wrist, incredulous. "Does this mean they can't find me anymore?" The witch hesitated. "It means it'll be harder," she answered. "But not impossible. Not for House Varkos. They've been hunting for centuries." Ayla swallowed hard. Cale moved near the door, and Ayla felt his emotion cross the room. A fierce care, almost painful. How much time do we have? Kale asked. Soren appeared in the entrance, like she'd been summoned by the question. Messengers at the border, she reported. Not from Grey Vale, from the East Road. They found signs of camp. And blood. Not much, but fresh. The witch closed her eyes for a moment, like listening to something. When she opened them, her voice came low. They're already here. Ayla felt her heart stop. Here. In the castle? Not inside. Soren answered, hard. Yet. Kale turned his face to Ayla, and in that instant, Ayla saw his choice happen with clarity. You're not sleeping alone anymore, Kale said. Ayla's eyes widened, and panic tried to rise, the old fear of being invaded. Kale raised one hand slightly, like calming before explaining. Not in the same room as me, if you don't want, he added immediately. But close enough that I can reach you in 1 second. Close enough that no one touches you before going through me. Ayla breathed with difficulty. The proposal wasn't prison. It was safety. And still, safety was something so unknown it frightened. The witch looked at Ayla. Choose, she said. Ayla looked at Kale. Then at Soren. Then at her wrist. And with her throat tight, she said, I want to stay close. Kale nodded once. Just once. But inside, Ayla felt his wave of relief like it was hers too. Then, before they could leave the room, a distant explosion shook the stone. It wasn't strong enough to knock anyone down, but it was strong enough to make the candles flicker and the circle's salt scatter. Soren was already running before anyone spoke. Kale moved to the door, and Ayla followed without thinking. In the corridor, a guard appeared, breathless, eyes wide. Your Majesty, he shouted. The West Gate. They crossed the wall like shadows. He swallowed. We didn't see where they came from. The witch closed her eyes with anger. Veil spell, she murmured. Kale went rigid, and his voice came out like steel. Bring Ayla to my side. Now. Ayla felt the world tighten, but didn't back down. Because in that instant, with vampires crossing the wall and the mark on her wrist silent as a promise, she understood one thing with brutal clarity. Her old life was over, and the new world wasn't asking if she wanted to participate. It was demanding courage, and the sound of running footsteps, above, proved the night was only beginning. Chapter 8. The castle entered war mode without needing a single official word. Ayla realized this in the way the air changed as soon as they climbed the stairs. Guards emerging from side corridors, doors being locked, the metallic sound of bolts and the dry crack of short orders. Everything happened fast, but there was no panic. There was discipline. And still, Ayla felt panic inside her because discipline didn't prevent blood. Discipline only made blood fall more efficiently. Kale walked ahead, steps firm, and Soren was a blade at his side, talking to 2 captains at once. The witch came right behind Ayla, too silent, like she was saving energy. The mark on Ayla's wrist stayed dark, but she felt the bonds echo like a tense line pulling her chest toward Kale. Ayla had never been in the middle of a fortress on alert. In Grey Vale, threats were internal, cruel, and predictable. Punishments, judgments, humiliations. Here was different. Here, danger had teeth that respected no law at all. When they reached the west corridor, the sound became clear, a low alarm, not a hysterical bell, but a deep call, repeated at exact intervals. Beneath it, there were shouts, not of terror, of command. Kale turned his face to Ayla for a moment. Stay at my side, he said. Not behind, beside. Ayla felt her throat close. Why? The answer came short, like he didn't have time to soften. Because they attack what looks weakest. And because I'm not going to treat you as weak. Ayla held her breath, and something inside her aligned with that phrase. It wasn't complete courage, it was still fear, a lot of fear. But it was the first time fear didn't come with automatic submission. They entered a wide room with high windows and a corridor leading to the inner walls. Several guards were positioned. 2 archers aimed outside through narrow slits. A captain argued with Soren, pointing to the courtyard, where shadows moved too fast to be human. Ayla tried to see and felt her stomach drop. There weren't many. 3, maybe 4 figures. But they moved like light didn't reach them, like the torches hesitated to touch them. And even from a distance, Ayla felt a cold that didn't come from wind, a cold that seemed to come from inside bone. House Varkos, the witch murmured behind her. They don't enter to conquer. They enter to harvest. Ayla swallowed. Harvest? What? The witch didn't answer, and her silence was worse than any explanation. Kale spoke to Soren without taking his eyes off the courtyard. Where are they? Inside the outer wall, Soren answered. But they haven't reached the castle's heart yet. They crossed the west gate with Vale, which means… Soren clenched her jaw. Someone opened a breach for them. Ayla felt her blood freeze. Betrayal. Inside the castle. In the place that had just become safety in her mind. She looked at Kale without realizing. He didn't show surprise. He showed controlled irritation, like the possibility had always existed, just waiting for the moment. Lock the service wings, Kale ordered. Total isolation. And I want the list of everyone who had access to the wall seals in the last 7 days. Soren nodded and left with 2 guards. Ayla stayed near Kale and, for a moment, realized she was doing this without apologizing, without asking if she could. It was a new, strange instinct, staying where his presence kept her standing. The witch lightly touched her own neck, like feeling a shiver. They've already sensed you, she said, low. Ayla froze. But I silenced the mark. You silenced the glow, the witch corrected. Not the destiny. The trail isn't just light, it's impression. It's the smell of moon on the soul. Ayla felt her stomach turn again. So, I have no way to hide? The witch stared at her. You have a way to learn. But that takes time. And they won't give you time. A scream cut through the courtyard. A guard fell to his knees near the inner wall, like something had crossed the air. It wasn't an arrow. There was no visible impact. It was like his strength had been ripped from inside. Ayla felt her legs weaken. Kale moved. He didn't run like a man. He ran like a decision. He reached the fallen guard, touched his shoulder, and Ayla saw a different glow cross Kale's hand. Not clear magical light, but a kind of warm, contained energy. The guard pulled in air hard, like he'd been returned to himself. Ayla blinked, confused. Kale returned to her quickly, and his expression was harder. They're testing the defenses, he said. The witch closed her eyes. No. Her voice came lower. They're testing you. Ayla felt a cold that had nothing to do with night. Me? Kale stared at the courtyard. They want you to move, he said. Want to see you react. Want to provoke panic. Because panic opens cracks in the trail's silence. Ayla swallowed, and her body responded to the word panic like it was a command. No. Not now. Don't give it to them. What do I do? She asked, and hated the tremor in her voice. Kale turned to her again. You listen to me, he said. And you breathe. And above all, you don't decide anything out of guilt. The word guilt hit Ayla like he'd read every mental scar from Grey Vale. Ayla opened her mouth to answer, but the witch raised her hand. They're coming in, she said. Not the whole castle. Here, at this point. The witch pointed to a side door, a narrow passage leading to service corridors. A door too common, too discreet. Soren returned at the same instant, breathless. Your Majesty, that door, she began, and her face tensed seeing where the witch pointed. That door was opened from inside. The air grew heavy. Ayla realized she was squeezing the marked wrist hard, and the skin hurt. Kale breathed deep. Then, very slowly, he removed his dark cloak and placed it over Ayla's shoulders. She froze, surprised. What are you doing? Kale adjusted the cloak carefully. Marking you as under my protection before my people, he said. Not as property, as a sign. Ayla felt tears threaten. Again that strange pain of being treated like a person and, at the same time, like someone who matters. Kale raised his hand. Soren, choose 8, he ordered. Fast, silent, no one panics. No one chases whatever's in there without my order. Soren nodded and gestured. 8 guards positioned, weapons ready, expression firm. The witch looked at Ayla. "You're staying here," she said, "and you'll keep the mark silent." Ayla nodded, but her heart beat so loud it felt like betrayal. Cale took a step toward the side door, and before going, he looked at Ayla one last time. "If I say now, you run to the inner hall," he said, "and you don't stop." Ayla swallowed. "And if you—" She didn't finish. Couldn't say die. Cale held her gaze. "I'll come back," he said, and for a brief second, his voice lost hardness and gained promise. "I'll come back because I chose this." Ayla stood frozen. The phrase kept vibrating inside her. Then Cale made a short gesture. The door was opened at once. The corridor beyond was too dark, even with torches, and Ayla felt from afar a metallic, cold smell, like blood kept in a chalice. The guards advanced. The first took 2 steps and stopped, rigid, like he'd heard something no one else heard. Ayla held her breath. And then, in the dark, a voice emerged. Not a loud voice, a beautiful voice. Smooth, almost seductive. "King of the North," the voice said, like it was smiling. "What an honor. You brought the key right to my door." Ayla's blood froze. Cale didn't answer immediately. The shadow in the corridor moved, and for a second Ayla saw a face. Skin too pale, eyes too dark, smile too human for something that wasn't human. The vampire tilted his head. "She smells like moon," he said, and the phrase was directed at Ayla without looking directly at her. "And you smell like hunger to protect." Ayla felt her wrist try to glow. She closed her fist hard. Silence. Silence. The vampire took a step, and with a quick motion, the first guard fell to the floor like he'd been turned off. Cale moved. Ayla saw only a blur. Cale advancing, grabbing the vampire by the collar and throwing him against the corridor wall, stone cracking. There was no blood, but there was enough impact to echo. Ayla brought her hand to her mouth, trembling, and then the vampire laughed. "Ah," he murmured, voice full of cruel pleasure. "There it is. That's what I wanted to see." Cale growled low, and Ayla felt the sound as vibration in her chest. But before Cale could advance again, a second shadow appeared behind him, and the witch screamed, "Cale!" It was too fast. A thin, dark, almost invisible blade passed through the air and cut Cale's shoulder. Not deep enough to bring him down, but enough to change the air. The smell of blood appeared, and with the smell, Ayla's mark responded. Her wrist glowed at once, violent, like the law was shouting to the entire world. "Here." Ayla felt her own heart drop. "No," she whispered, desperate, but it was too late. The vampire raised his face, eyes fixing on the glow like he saw a door opening. "Thank you, little key," he said with false sweetness. "Now I know exactly where you are." And at the same instant, from outside the castle, a distant howl, not from a wolf, cut through the night like an answer. Chapter 9. Ayla didn't think. She didn't have time to think. The glow on her wrist was a beacon, and at the same time, a cry for help. It was proof she still didn't control anything, and shame came with it. Automatic, ancient. I ruined it. I always ruin things. I'm the problem. Except this time, shame didn't find the easy ground of before, because Cale stumbled one step and still turned toward her first. Not to complain, to protect. "Ayla!" he called, and his voice had no accusation. It had command. "Look at me." Ayla obeyed, and in obeying, realized how much his presence had already become anchor inside her. "Breathe," Cale said, and his golden eyes held hers hard. "Don't let guilt break you now." Ayla gasped. Her wrist glowed like fire under skin. The witch advanced and drew a quick symbol in the air, like trying to pull the glow back inside. "Concentrate," she ordered Ayla. "Close. Close like you closed before." Ayla tried, but Cale's blood in the air seemed to pull the law outward, like the bond wanted to expose itself to defend him. And Ayla felt, suddenly, the echo of Cale's fear crossing her chest. Not fear for himself, but for her. "He thinks I'll fall. He thinks I'll blame myself and freeze." That hurt more than the vampire's threat. Ayla squeezed her wrist with her other hand, closed her eyes, and tried to remember what she wanted to protect. Not run. Protect. She saw in a flash. The room. The door closing. Cale outside. Guards there. Saw the question, "May I?" before the touch. Saw his gesture at the council, saying her name like it was worthy of being said. I want to protect this chance. She breathed deep, and with effort, pushed the glow inward like pushing a heavy door against wind. The glow diminished. It didn't extinguish completely, but lowered enough not to illuminate the entire hall. The witch nodded, tense. Better, she murmured, but they've already sensed it. From the corridor, the vampire laughed again. His laugh was too calm, like he was enjoying himself. Close the doors, Cale ordered Soren without taking his eyes from the corridor. I want double barrier. Now. Soren shouted orders. Guards moved. Inner doors began being locked, and the sound of iron against iron seemed the only solid thing that night. Ayla was trembling, but didn't back down. Not this time. She saw Cale's shoulder, where the blade had cut. Blood ran in a thin line. He didn't seem to feel pain like a human would. Still, the smell was there, and the smell attracted. The witch approached Cale, pressed herbs against the cut, and murmured quick words. The bleeding diminished, but didn't stop completely. It's not a common blade, the witch said, low. It has silver ash and night oil. Retards healing. Cale growled. They came prepared, he said, and there was contained hatred. The vampire appeared in the corridor entrance again, now accompanied by 2 more shadows. 3. Their eyes glowed in the dark like light was food. The first vampire tilted his head, smiling. King Cale. It doesn't have to be ugly, he said with false sweetness. We don't want your castle. Don't want your wolves. We only want her. Ayla's stomach turned. The witch went rigid. Soren took a step forward, weapon in hand. Cale raised his hand, not to attack, but to prevent others from moving without thinking. No, Cale said, and the word fell like sentence. She's not an object for trade. The vampire laughed softly. Ah, you wolves always pretend morality, he answered. But when hunger presses, everyone trades something. You'll see. When the kingdom threatens to fall, you'll push her to us yourself. Ayla felt the blow of the phrase, because it was exactly what Grey Veil would have done. And a part of her, trained, whispered, He'll do it too. He has to. You're not important enough for a king. Ayla clenched her fingers. Then, without realizing she was doing it, she took a step forward. Soren looked at her like she would stop her. Cale turned his face. Fast. Ayla, he began. Ayla cut him off, voice low but firm. No. The word came out before fear, and for the first time, Ayla saw shock in some guards' eyes. Not because she challenged Cale, but because she spoke like someone who existed. Ayla looked at the vampire. I'm not anyone's key, she said. The vampire smiled, delighted. She has fire. Ayla felt her wrist tremble but kept her fist closed. If you want to use me, she continued, and her voice failed a little, but she insisted, you'll have to go through me knowing I'll fight. The vampire blinked slowly, like appreciating. Fighting is beautiful, he said, but useless. He raised his hand, and Ayla felt the air grow heavy, like shadows had weight. The witch screamed, Don't look in the eyes, but it was too late. Ayla felt the vampire's gaze lock with hers for one short second, and in that second, her mind slipped. She saw images, not her memories, but something placed in her head like sweet poison. Grey Veil in flames, Cale dead, Soren kneeling, the castle empty, and Ayla alone at the center, marked as guilt. Ayla stumbled, heart racing, vision blurred. Cale grabbed her arm firmly. Ayla, he called, and his voice cut through the spell like a pull. Ayla blinked, breathed, returned. The vampire made a sound of disappointment. A strong bond, he murmured. Stronger than I expected. The witch advanced and traced a symbol in the air between Ayla and the vampire, like raising an invisible screen. Enough, she snarled. You won't enter her mind. The vampire laughed. I don't need to, he answered. Guilt already lives there. I just knocked on the door. Ayla felt like vomiting. Cale went rigid with anger. And then, with dangerous calm, he spoke to Ayla. Low, direct, like only the two of them existed. Do you trust me enough to do what I ask? Ayla trembled. The word trust was still a precipice. But she looked at his wounded shoulder, looked at the guards, looked at the witch, who had refused to seal someone against their will, and realized trusting wasn't believing nothing bad would happen. It was choosing someone to stand beside when the bad inevitably arrived. Ayla nodded. Yes, she said, almost voiceless. Cale breathed deep. Then you're coming with me, he said. Now, to the seal chamber. The witch's eyes widened. Your Majesty, the chamber... I know what it is, Cale cut. And I know the price. Ayla felt her stomach drop. What chamber? She asked. Cale held her face with both hands. Quick, firm, but carefully, like it was the only way to guarantee she'd hear him. There's an ancient seal under this castle, he said. A seal that can hide your trail from anything living or dead for an entire night. Ayla's eyes widened. Then let's... she began, desperate. But Cale continued, and truth came like a blade. But it requires royal blood to activate. Mine, or yours. Ayla felt her heart stop. The witch whispered, horrified. Cale, no. The vampire smiled wider, like this was exactly what he wanted to hear. Ah, he murmured. So it does exist. Ayla felt absolute ice. Because now she understood. They weren't just hunting her. They were hunting the seal. And she was the way to reach it. Ayla looked at Cale, chest tightening until it hurt. You're going to cut yourself for me? She asked, and her voice failed again, full of dread and guilt. Cale didn't look away. I'll do whatever's necessary to keep you alive tonight, he answered. But you'll choose with me. I won't do anything that turns you into debt. Ayla felt tears rise. The vampire watched, amused, like watching a play. Choose fast, he sang, because I brought winter with me. From outside, a gust of wind crossed the castle's cracks and extinguished 2 torches at once. Darkness advanced a little, and on Ayla's wrist, the mark trembled. Not with glow, but with urgency. Ayla breathed deep. She could feel guilt trying to take control. If you weren't here, he wouldn't bleed. If you didn't exist, no one would die. But behind the guilt, there was something else now. Will. The will not to be returned to the role of burden. Ayla lifted her face. I'm going with you, she said to Cale. But I won't let you pay alone. Cale blinked, surprised. The witch's eyes widened like she understood the implication. Ayla, she murmured. Ayla touched her own wrist. If the seal needs blood, she said, and her voice trembled but didn't break, then I choose to offer mine, not because I'm less, but because I also choose to fight for myself. Silence fell for half a second. Cale looked at her like he was watching someone be born, and in that instant, the vampire tilted his head, too satisfied. Perfect, he said. Exactly the decision I wanted. Ayla felt ice cross through her. What do you mean? The vampire smiled, and his smile was the cruelest thing that night. That, the seal chamber, he said smoothly, is exactly where I need you to go. And before anyone reacted, the corridor's shadows moved at once, like darkness had decided to run. Cale pulled Ayla close and growled a single order. Run. And they ran, not to escape the castle, but into its heart. And Ayla knew, with terrifying clarity, that the next step would be the costliest of all, because for the first time she wasn't just trying to survive, she was trying to choose who she'd be when she survived. Chapter 10. The run through the castle didn't feel like running. It felt like falling. Ayla felt air scrape her throat, felt the heavy cloak on her shoulders, felt Cale's hand firm on her wrist, not pulling like an owner, but guiding like someone who refused to lose her in a dark corridor. Behind, the sound of footsteps had no human cadence. It was a quick slide, like shadows that had learned to use the floor without making noise. They crossed 2 narrow corridors, turned left, descended a stone staircase, and reached an iron door with ancient symbols carved on its surface. Halfway there, Soren appeared in a side passage, covered in sweat and dust, face hard like someone already fighting elsewhere. "Your Majesty!" she shouted low, like sound could summon hell itself. "They've spread. They're trying to find you from inside. There are people fallen, without blood, like they were drained." Ayla felt her stomach turn, but didn't stop. Kale didn't stop. "Lock the upper wings," he ordered. "And do what you have to. No one descends to the basement without your authorization." Soren nodded, and her gaze passed over Ayla with different intensity, more respectful, more human. "Don't let him die for you," she said quick. The phrase hit Ayla like a slap. Kale squeezed her hand, almost imperceptible. "She won't," he answered for Ayla, but without removing her right to choose. "I won't let her." Soren disappeared in the corridor like a blade returning to combat. Kale turned to the iron door. The witch arrived right behind, breathless, and Ayla realized for the first time that this woman also had fear. Not fear of dying, but fear of opening something that should remain closed. "The seal chamber is on the other side," the witch said. "And what sleeps down there responds to blood." Ayla felt her wrist throb. Kale faced the door like facing an ancient oath. "Then let's do this the right way," he said. Ayla swallowed. "Is there a right way to bleed?" Kale looked at her, and his expression broke for half a second. Not weakness, but humanity. "There's a right way not to turn you into currency," he answered. He released her wrist for a moment, and Ayla almost missed the contact like it was ground. Then Kale removed from his belt a small short blade, clean, simple, like it was tool not weapon. The witch raised her hand. "Before," she said, "you need to know what the chamber truly does." Kale didn't answer, so the witch stared directly at Ayla. "The seal doesn't just hide your trail," she explained. "It compresses. It erases the law's song for a few hours. But this has cost. The law hates being silenced. It will react. It will pull you toward each other. It will increase the connection." Ayla felt heat rise up her neck. "Pull? How?" The witch hesitated, choosing words. "Like destiny trying to close a door you tried to lock." Kale hardened. "Don't speak like she's condemned to me," he cut. "This isn't destiny, it's choice." The witch nodded slowly. "Then choose now," she said, serious. "Because when you enter, either you enter as allies, or you enter cracked, and they'll use the crack." Ayla felt her heart beat in her throat. Guilt tried to speak first, as always. If you stay, he bleeds. If you stay, he dies. But before guilt won, Ayla realized something. Guilt was a collar, and a collar was the same thing Grey Veil always tried to put on her. She breathed deep and looked at Kale. "I don't want you to save me alone," she said, and her voice came out firm in a way she didn't know she had. "I want to be on the same side as you." Kale held her gaze. "That means I'll listen to you," he said, "and you'll tell me when to stop. When you don't want more. When it hurts too much. I don't go over that." Ayla nodded. "And you'll let me do something difficult without taking away my choice?" Kale hesitated just an instant, and Ayla knew he already understood. "Yes," he said finally, "if it's your choice." Ayla extended her arm and pulled up her sleeve, revealing the silver mark. The glow was faint but alive, like a hidden heart. "Then I choose," Ayla said slowly, so the phrase would enter her as truth. "I choose to use my blood. Not to pay for existing, but to protect what I just conquered." The witch closed her eyes for a second and murmured something that sounded like prayer. Kale stood motionless, and Ayla felt, through the bond, a warm wave cross her. Pride, admiration, and a contained fear, because he wanted to protect her even from herself. But he didn't stop her. Ayla took the blade from his hand carefully. Her hands trembled a little, but not like before. It was trembling from life, not submission. "Just one cut," the witch instructed. "Small, enough to touch the symbol on the door, and when the chamber responds, don't let go of his hand." Ayla swallowed. She looked at the iron door, at the carved symbol, an incomplete circle, two intertwined lines. and for a moment remembered Gray Veil, a stone circle, a sentence. Her life reduced to yes or death. I won't live in their circle again. Ayla pressed the blade to her fingertip. The pain was quick, clean, a hot, real sting. Blood appeared, red, alive, too human for the ancient things surrounding them. The witch held Ayla's wrist for a second, guiding her. Now, Ayla touched the door's symbol with the blood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door breathed. That's how it seemed. Like the iron had pulled air. A tremor ran through the carved symbols, and Ayla's blood spread in thin veins through the incomplete circle's lines, glowing a dark red that became silver at the end. The entire castle seemed to groan, and the door opened by itself, heavy, slow, like it was reluctant. On the other side, there were stairs descending, older, colder. The air that rose from there smelled of wet stone and something more, something that recalled rotted flour, sweet and wrong. Ayla felt the mark on her wrist hurt, not a surface burn, a chest pain like someone had pulled a line from inside her. The witch spoke fast. "The chamber is waking. Enter." Kale took Ayla's hand, firm, warm. "Look at me," he said low. Ayla looked. "You're here with me," Kale affirmed, like the phrase was a spell. "It's not Gray Veil. It's not guilt. It's you, with me." Ayla nodded, almost breathless. And they descended. Down below, the seal chamber was circular and enormous, with walls covered in ancient runes that glowed faint, like the stone kept light inside. At the center, there was a basin of black stone. Around it, 4 columns with symbols identical to the doors. Ayla took 2 steps and felt the world tilt, like gravity there was different. The mark on her wrist burned, and the echo of the bond with Kale grew louder, a constant presence, like proximity, amplified everything. The witch entered last and closed the door behind them with a quick gesture. "Now," she said, "the seal needs to be activated with intention." Kale didn't release Ayla's hand. "How?" Ayla asked, and her voice came out hoarse. The witch pointed to the basin. "Blood touches stone," she said, "and intention touches the world. You both need to declare what you're sealing." Ayla swallowed. "The trail?" "The door the trail opens," the witch corrected, "because that's what they want. They don't want you just for being you. They want what you open." Ayla felt ice. Then, from outside, a sound crossed the closed iron, a beautiful, cruel laugh. The vampire's voice. "You actually entered," he said, like he was beside the door, whispering through the metal. "Thank you." Ayla felt panic try to rise. Kale squeezed her hand. "Now, Ayla," he said. "Not later." Ayla breathed deep, walked to the basin, and saw her own reflection in the black stone. Big eyes, pale with fear, but with something new behind. A spark that didn't exist in Gray Veil. She raised her still bleeding finger and let a drop fall inside the basin. The sound was small, but the chamber responded like earthquake. The runes on the walls lit up, living silver. The basin glowed, and Ayla felt something pull her chest, like the law inside her had been touched by a giant hand. Ayla gasped. The bond with Kale fired, and she felt his emotions invade like a wave. Fury, protection, and a nascent love he tried to hide even from himself, because he was afraid of turning her into destiny. Ayla held the basin's edge to keep from falling. "Say it," the witch ordered. "What are you sealing?" Ayla closed her eyes, and for a moment she was that female in the stone circle. Then she opened her eyes and remembered. Now she was in another circle, a circle that wasn't sentence. It was choice. "I seal the trail that turns me into object," Ayla said, and her voice came out trembling but firm. "I seal the door they want to use through me." The chamber glowed brighter. Kale took a step, still holding her hand, and spoke. "I seal any claim over her that doesn't come from herself." Ayla felt tears rise, but they weren't from shame. And in the next instant, the iron door behind them shook like something had collided from outside. 1 knock, 2, a sound of metal being scratched by nails. The vampire sang, amused. "You think a door stops me?" The witch snarled and began drawing symbols in the air, reinforcing the runes. "The seal is activating," she said, "but you need to complete it. The law requires a final phrase, a final choice." Ayla looked at Kale, desperate. "Witch?" The witch spoke with tense voice. "The law of the scent trail only calms when it knows it's not a chain. It needs to hear you saying this, out loud, so the chamber understands it's not capture. It's pact." Ayla felt her heart tighten. She knew the danger of that phrase. Pact could become prison in the wrong mouth. But Kale wasn't Grey Veil. And still, Ayla needed to say it in a way that didn't betray herself. She breathed and spoke, looking directly at Kale. "I don't belong to you." The world seemed to stop. Kale didn't take offense. He didn't harden. He just nodded, like that phrase was exactly what he wanted to hear from her. "I know," he said. Ayla continued, and her voice grew stronger. "But I choose to stand beside you." The mark on her wrist burned and then grew warm in a different way, like the law had finally relaxed its hand. Kale answered without hesitation, "And I choose to protect your choice, not control you." The chamber glowed like it had received nourishment. The black stone basin lit from within, and then a silent wave spread across the floor, like an invisible breeze that swept the room. Ayla felt the trail vanish. Not the mark. The mark was still there, but its song was compressed, silenced, like it had been covered by snow. From outside, the vampire made an irritated sound, the first sign he wasn't enjoying himself anymore. "No," he hissed. "No, no, no." The iron door received one last hard knock, and then silence. A heavy, defeated silence. The witch released air like she'd been holding it for years. "It works," she said with contained disbelief. Ayla stumbled, body weak, like the seal had sucked a piece of her energy. Kale caught her before she fell. This time there was no question, but there was care. He supported her firmly and at the same time maintained space, like saying with his body, "You're safe and still free." Ayla breathed, gasping. "Is it over?" she whispered. The witch made a face. "Over for today," she answered. "The seal gives one night. Tomorrow they can try again. But now you have time." Kale tilted his head, looking at Ayla. "Time for what?" Ayla asked. Kale answered with a calm that seemed like promise, not trap. "Time to transform your life into something that can't be returned." Ayla closed her eyes, and tears fell again. Because for the first time, the word tomorrow didn't sound like threat. It sounded like possibility. When they climbed back, the castle was still on alert, but the air was less heavy. Guards still ran, Soren still shouted orders, and there were wounded being carried, alive. Which, that night, was already victory. Soren found Kale in the corridor and saw Ayla's state. "She activated it?" Soren asked, low. The witch nodded. Soren released air, like she almost couldn't believe it. "Then they won't find her." "Not today," Kale confirmed. Soren looked at Ayla. "You were brave," she said simply. Ayla swallowed. Brave. No one had said that about her before without irony. Later, in the room, Ayla sat on the bed's edge and stared at her wrist. The mark was there, discreet, like a scar of light. Kale stayed near the door, as he'd promised since the first night. Only now he didn't seem just a guard. He seemed constant presence of someone who chose to remain. Ayla breathed deep, then spoke. "I thought it would be easier to hate myself than fight for myself." Kale turned his face. "And today you chose not to hate yourself," he said. Ayla looked at him, eyes burning. "I chose because you gave me space to choose." Kale took a step, stopped at a safe distance. "That won't change," he said. "Not with the entire kingdom shouting." Ayla nodded. And in that silence, she realized, maybe the law of the scent trail hadn't woken to bind her to someone. Maybe it had woken to tear her from where she was bound. Epilogue. 3 moons later, the north still spoke of the night shadows crossed the wall and returned to darkness without taking the key. Grey Veil sent letters, then sent threats, then sent silence. Because silence, when it comes from Grey Veil, is always a sign of open wound. Ayla learned to walk the castle corridors without apologizing for existing. She learned to train with Soren, to recognize danger's smell before panic, and to silence the trail when anxiety tried to scream in her wrist. And Kale remained king. But around her, he was something else too. A man who asked, "May I?" before touching. A man who called her name like it was worthy of being said. A man who understood that love without choice is just another form of cage. On the first morning Ayla woke and didn't feel guilt, as the day's first sensation. She went to the window, saw the clear sky, and realized a simple truth. She still had fear. Only now, for the first time, fear didn't command her. And when Kale appeared in the doorway and looked at her in silence, Ayla didn't lower her head. She simply extended her hand, not as